Hello everyone. In this segment, we will discuss using variables in MATLAB. So sometimes one is interested in storing the value of certain calculation or a certain value inside a variable to use it for further calculation. For example, you might want to store a value of 5 in the variable x, so you would write x equals 5. And if I hit enter, you notice that MATLAB actually repeats to me that x equals 5. Uh, and then sometimes you really don't want MATLAB to do this repetition, but instead it still keep the variable in the memory of the computer. So here, as you see, x equals 5, it's in the memory. Suppose I want also to assign y equals 7. I want the assignment to happen, but I don't want MATLAB to write this for me. Then I put a semicolon, and then I hit enter. You see, a value of 7 was assigned to the variable y, but it is in the memory, but MATLAB doesn't write it for me. So the writing process is in fact actually time consuming. And if you don't really need to see the outcome of the calculation in front of you, then there is no need actually to ask MATLAB to write. And as such, using a semicolon is recommended. You could also assign a variable assign a value to a variable by doing some sort of a calculation. So let's say 5 plus 6 times 1, or let's say times 2.4, and that will give you that equal 19.4. And of course, you can start doing this arithmetic on the variables themselves. So for example, I can define another variable, let me call it w, and then I would say that w is maybe x minus y first because of the parentheses, and then divided by z. The answer will be negative 0.1031, as you can see here. So using variables is quite useful in doing computations and in storing values in these variables. But there are certain guidelines for variable names. So guidelines for variable names. The first guideline is that the name has to start with a letter. So always start with a letter. And as such, you cannot start a variable name with a number. And then after that, so after the letter, we can mix numbers and underscores. We can add numbers and underscore. So for example, I can do something like this. I can define x2 equals 20. So that's fine. And that's the variable x2 here equals 20. I can also define maybe student grade. As you see here, I'm using underscore, and that's totally allowed, equals, 14. So that's also fine. But I cannot define a variable and I call it, for example, 4g. So I cannot write 4g equal 20 because it starts with a number. So this is not allowed in MATLAB, something like this. So MATLAB will start complaining by saying that this is invalid expression. Another thing is spaces are not allowed. So spaces are not allowed. So if you remember, there was this student grade variable. If I tried to do something like this, student and then space grade, then equal 24, then it will cause issue because it's considered that student is something and grade is something, and then MATLAB starts to complain that it doesn't recognize the function or the variable student. So spaces are not allowed. These are the most important guidelines for the variables in MATLAB, and pretty much these are applicable for any programming language. You have to start with a letter. After the letter, you can mix numbers and underscore, and then spaces are not allowed. And in fact, usually the underscore is used instead of the space. So for example, if you want to define a variable, let's say a high temperature or T high, The way we write this in MATLAB, or typically in programming, we say T underscore high. For example, this could be a high temperature, let's say 170 degrees Celsius. Okay, so it is recommended to use the underscore instead of the space. And another recommendation is that it's better to choose meaningful names for your variables, usually related to the scientific or engineering problem that you are trying to solve. So, for example, T underscore high is something that an engineer or a scientist would recognize easily its meaning. Another last comment that's very important is that MATLAB is case sensitive. So MATLAB is case sensitive, which means that small letters and capital letters are different. For example, if I ask MATLAB, so let's actually do CLC, and let me show you another thing. Sometimes you want to clear the memory from the variables that you used in a previous exercise or calculation, then you can actually do clear, and that will clear the memory. Suppose someone calculated little d equal 20. Then by mistake, you don't think that MATLAB is case sensitive, and then you want to calculate x equal capital D plus, 10, imagining that capital D is the same as small d. Unfortunately, this is not the case. And MATLAB will start complaining that capital D is unrecognized variable. And it suggests to you to use small d instead because small d is in the memory. So MATLAB is case sensitive. While small d is 20, I can define capital D equal, 12 or something. And that's totally fine because those are different. Some programming languages are not case sensitive, but MATLAB is a case sensitive programming language. We have to do a final and very, very fundamental discussion about differences between programming and mathematics when it comes to variables and arithmetic with variables. So let's do this simple comparison here. I have programming on one side and I have mathematics on the other side. Okay. There are two important points that we would love to discuss here. The first one, in mathematics, it is totally fine to write something like x equal 3 or to write that 3 equals x. So in mathematics, both of them are absolutely fine because this sign is an equality sign. So it means that two things are equal to each other. While in programming, x equals 3 is a perfectly legitimate expression, but 3 equals x doesn't have any meaning. So in programming, this is like, MATLAB or any programming language, as a matter of fact, will start complaining what's going on here. Because in programming, this sign, it does not mean equality. It means assignment. It's like you are assigning a value of 3 to the variable x. So let's actually test this here on the MATLAB screen. It's totally fine to write x equals 3, no problem at all. But if I type 3 equals x, then issues will start to arise. So it says incorrect use of the assignment operator, assign a value to a variable using this, and compare. So yeah, let's skip this part because this will appear in the later part of the course. So, but let's recap here. In mathematics, both these expressions are perfectly fine, but in programming, only this one has a meaning, which is the assignment, but this one, it doesn't have any meaning, not only in MATLAB, but pretty much in all programming languages. So another item of discussion, and this is really very, very fundamental, and we will use it in later parts of this course. In mathematics, so let's start with mathematics, it's completely wrong and doesn't have any sense to write that x equal x plus 1. Because in mathematics, one way to think of this is that you can cancel x with x. This is like an algebraic expression, and then you will end up with 0 equals 1, which of course, is something meaningless in mathematics. So if you see something like this, one would be puzzled what's going on there. So this doesn't have any sense in mathematics. In programming, on the other hand, this is a perfectly fine expression. And it basically means take the old value of x, add 1 on top of it, and then put the final result inside x again. So it's like you are asking the programming language to increase the value of the variable x by 1. Let's test this here. Let me do CLC and maybe clear one more time. I can type that x equal 10. Then I can ask MATLAB, could you please increase 10 by 1? So this way, the way I wrote it here, it means that please increase x by 1. If I do this, it will tell me, yes, that's fine, and x equals 11. You can do this also in subtraction. So for example, you can say that x equal x minus 2. Again, if this was mathematics, it doesn't have any sense, but in programming, it's totally fine. And it basically means subtract 2 from the value of x. So here, let me write this. So I can say x equal x minus 2, and the answer that I will get is 9. So it was 11, and now it is 9, which is perfectly fine. And you can do this in multiplication, you can do this in division. So let's see, I can say, let's actually write this in MATLAB. I can say that the new value of x is the old value of x divided by 3. So what's going to happen here is going to take the 9 and divide it by 3. So the answer will be 3. Or I can do this with multiplication. So the new value of x is the old value of x multiplied by 2. That's basically going to take the value of 3, which is currently in the memory here, and then it will multiply it by 2 to give me 6. So in summary, we learned two things in this segment. We learned that there are certain guidelines for naming variables in MATLAB, and those are usually common in most programming languages. So you need to start the variable name with a letter. After that, you can add numbers or underscores. That's totally fine, but spaces are not allowed. And MATLAB in particular is case sensitive. So small y is different than capital Y. And as a comparison between mathematics and programming, expressions like 3 equal x are not allowed in programming, but x equal 3 of course are allowed, and they are interpreted as an assignment rather than equality. On the other hand, expressions like x equal x plus 1 are totally fine in programming, but they are not allowed in mathematics because from algebra point of view, they lead to nonsense results, but in programming they are perfectly fine, and usually they mean increase the variable by 1 or decrease 2 from the variable, and so on and so forth. Thank you so much, and we will meet in another recording.